Hello and welcome to another episode of our podcast series. Today, we will be talking about data and its power to tell stories. And joining us today, we have here Anand. So, welcome Anand to the podcast.
Thank you for having me over.
Yeah, so let us begin by, why don't you tell us about yourself and a little bit about your journey?
Sure. So I'm Anand Menon. I currently lead strategy and special initiatives at Wakefit. So we are a complete home solutions brand. So I've been with Wakefit for about a year now. We work on strategic initiatives in the founder's office. So a lot of data-oriented projects. We look into various trends in data, identify opportunity areas where we can actually take the business to the next level of growth. Right. Before Wakefit, so I was part of Flipkart, where I was leading sell side and P&L for one of the fashion categories there. So again, role that was completely into numbers, into P&L, revenue, cost optimization, pricing, inventory. So basically managing, it was more of a category management role, which I was doing there for almost 3 years. And before that, I worked in beauty at Sephora as part of the initial team, which kind of set up and scaled the business in India. So really got a chance to work on different functions. While primarily I was responsible for business analytics and planning, more to say. But I also got involved in marketing and supply chain planning. So really got to use the strength of data and understand different functions in detail and how data plays a very pivotal role in making the most out of any function that is there. So yeah, so a lot of planning analytics kind of roles I've been fortunate to be involved in over the last 9 years or so.
All right. So, you've worked in beauty and then you went into fashion and now you're in Wakefit. So, you have explored various industries. So, how has that been for you? And was data critical in all of these industries? And what exactly was the role of data over here in these various sectors?
So yeah, so like you said, all the industries look very different when you look at it. So beauty functions very differently from fashion, and furniture is a completely different ball game altogether. So, but there are some, what do you say, concepts which will remain the same throughout. So there will be some nuances to each industry, which is what is essentially the learning curve when you start off in a new industry. So just to give an example, in fashion, there is usually a cycle of spring, summer, autumn, winter, right? So there are seasons which are there. All the planning happens around these seasons. So any particular month, you'll be planning the season which is coming up, say 4 months later or 6 months later. And that's how the planning cycle goes. And at the end of the season, you just liquidate, get rid of all that stock, begin a completely new season. So the way you plan your inventory, the way you plan your pricing, the way you plan your entire business demand and supply has to be based on those seasonalities. When you come to beauty, it is a bit closer to how an FMCG would function. So it's more of a monthly cycle. There will be certain seasonalities in terms of events, or like sale really picks up towards the end of the year, which is also the marriage season. So all those are nuances of the market which get incorporated in the planning. So and again, like the home and furniture functions in a very different way altogether. So the key thing is that everyone needs inventory, everyone needs to price their stock, everyone needs to plan their demand and supply. The key thing is to understand the seasonality, the customer purchase pattern. Once you have those nuances, then it's all about creating models around it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, coming to the topic, so we were talking about data storytelling, right? So, what exactly is data storytelling and why is it so important?
The need for storytelling, where it arises. So we'll try to understand why it is important and where exactly is the challenge before we come to what it is exactly. So there is a lot of data out there now, especially more than it was, say, about 8-10 years back. There is data available for everything. So if you're in an online business, you know exactly how many people are visiting your platform, how many people are clicking on each element of your page, going to the next step. It's a lot of data. So when you're trying to analyze things like how do you make your customer journey more efficient, as they go down the funnel, there is a lot of data to actually analyze. You can look at it from a category point of view, you can look at it from a source or the channel point of view, you can look at it from a new or repeat point of view. Even within repeat, you have certain cuts, right? So there's a lot of data, and there's no one right way of looking at it. So the key thing is to understand what you're trying to do. What is the objective, right? So once the objective has been clearly discovered or agreed upon by all relevant stakeholders, then you try to figure out what is the story around that objective, right? So if I'm trying to improve my conversion, I will have to be more specific as to which cohorts am I talking about. Am I speaking about specific channels? Am I speaking about specific categories? Then I will reach a very clear objective that I want to do or achieve. And then I figure out what is the data that's going to help me answer the question. So you're kind of creating the story by setting your objective first. Once your objective is set, then the story begins. Okay, this is what your hypothesis is or what you're trying to achieve. So I will take only these 5 data points and analyze it in depth rather than taking 50 parameters, because that's not going to add up to the objective anyway. So how you kind of make sense of that madness of data and distill it to what is actually important, that is what defines how the story will be. The reason why the story is important is because, like human beings, as humans, we love to hear stories, and stories are something we relate to, we understand better. If I just put up a slide of a presentation with 20 columns and 50 rows and it's full of numbers, there might be a very clear trend emerging. But if there are 20 people sitting in the room, more than half of them won't be able to make sense of it, right? There are like so many numbers over there. So the key thing is, what is the insight coming out of the number, and how do you make it relevant for all these people sitting in the room? How do you tell that story so that they take away something from the meeting which becomes an actionable item, right? So that is where the storytelling aspect comes in. We generally miss out because we focus more on the analysis part. We try to see how we can analyze it more accurately. In most cases, the accuracy, if you get to about 90-95%, you're still very good enough, as long as you derive something actionable out of it. And people are able to understand and make sense of what you've made. So that's essentially where the need for it comes in.
Yeah. So obviously, the whole company or any company for that matter works on decisions which are derived by the data sets that they have. So yeah, obviously one must have that objective cleared at first, and then have some kind of decisions made. So like, how do you go about creating this data and then telling a story from it? What would be the process behind that?
So one problem in e-commerce in general is that it's very convenient for customers to place an order. So they'll place an order and a lot of people end up canceling or returning. So in fashion, the returns go up as high as 20 to 30% across platforms. It's not just one. Across platforms, 20 to 30% of returns is something that is seen. So one objective that companies generally take is, how do I reduce returns, right? So if that is the objective that we are trying to solve for, what we need to look at is the customer journey. How do they start off the journey? How is it that they end up purchasing the product? And why is it that they end up returning it, right? So that's the story that you are trying to fill in the blanks. That's typically the story. As a customer, I came to a platform, I saw a t-shirt, I liked it, I paid the money up front, it came, I returned it due to XYZ reason, and that's essentially the storyline. You're trying to answer the why they returned it, right? So you will be having a lot of data as to why the customer returned, because all platforms generally ask, right? Like, is it because the size was not right for you? Is it because maybe you didn't like it, or maybe it was not the same as what you saw on the website? So there are various reasons, or just changed my mind, I just want to return, I returned it because the company is allowing me to return, so I return it, right? So it's a matter of convenience. Now, if I'm trying to reduce that number, how do I actually go about analyzing it? How do I see each of these reasons? How do I actually make it better for the customer? If it's, say, customers ordered the wrong size, how do I make sure they order the right size in the first place? Do I give them enough references? Do I basically identify how I can make the journey better and easier for them so that I can avoid the return later? So when you analyze this data, this is essentially still like the skeleton of the story. When you analyze the data, you might see things like, say the customer says, I changed my mind. Say that comes out as your top reason, right? So one thing, this is like an actual example. You might take an inference from it and say that, okay, customer just changed their mind. There's nothing I can do about it as a company. I'll focus on the other buckets. But is that option the first default option that comes up for the customer, right? So that itself can drive people to just select that, return, and just move on, because people don't have time to really think that much, right? So being a person who's solving that problem, sitting in a company, it is critical to not just look at the data and then try to come with an inference for it. You also critically question ki, is that data right in the first place, right? And that is where the thing starts. So just it's not just about having the story and filling in the blanks. It's also about questioning the different inputs and variables that you have. So that's just one example. So based on different use cases, the story gets constructed differently, and then you question all the variables that are there. And if it comes together in a logical way, it's easier to explain to people and it's easier to drive action. So yeah.
So I think that example, cleared a lot of things about why and how of data and data storytelling. So Anand, what advice would you like to give to all the budding data analysts that will be, joining all these startups and MNCs? And how should they use these skills, or how should they present their stories in order for their companies or their colleagues to understand it in a better way?
So generally, when we start out in like working on data or a data related field, the first reaction would be to get overwhelmed by like what is the right answer, or like I've been asked to analyze or figure out a solution. How do I find that solution? And it gets quite overwhelming at times, because it's just a lot of numbers, and if you don't inherently like maths so much, it can become very challenging to even think about it, right? But the key aspect is to just not focus so much on the complexity of the numbers, and rather go back to the objective. So that's something that always helps, which like even in my teams, we keep reinforcing and doing it again and again, where we keep asking the question, like, what is the objective? What are we trying to solve, right? Why are we doing this? If that is very crystal clear, then your job becomes a lot easier. So generally, so like this is from what I have observed, whenever a person early stage in the career working on data related roles, right, they're generally given a problem statement saying that, okay, I want to understand what is the number of repeat customers in the last 12 months, right? And they end up figuring out which tables, where to get the data from. They'll put it together and they'll share it with the business team. Business team may not be able to use it in the same format, so then they'll ask for a query again, and then it goes back and forth many times. And in the end, as a person who is working on data, I may not really know where it is being used. Is it really adding any value? And honestly, it may not even be in my job description. But to really make a difference and to really become good in this field, right, the key thing is to understand the business impact of what you're doing, or the data that you're analyzing, or the actionables that you can get out of it, right? So it is very important to take that extra step, speak to the business owners who you're working with as a data analyst or a business analyst, and ask them, why are they asking for this data, or what are they trying to understand or get an answer to? Because then you will get an opportunity to think about that problem from your point of view. You will have a very different point of view, because you're working with data day in and day out, right? So you may get some answers which may not even be there in the hypothesis of the business team. Like they won't even think of it as an option, but you may have the answer to it. So you can only explore that potential of yours if you ask those questions, put in that extra step, and figure out why business team is asking a certain question, and try to answer it on your own. And also continuously follow up what did this result in, what is the action that was driven. So that will really help to understand or close the loop. It won't be just an exercise of, okay, maine analysis kar diya and I just sent it out, right? It's not just about the analysis, it's also about what resulted out of the analysis. So it's important to close the loop. That is where a lot of people, that's what really sets apart people who want to like get into a data kind of a role, move into a leadership role, that kind of a path, if you really understand the impact of what you're doing. So that is something that is key. I won't go into the technical aspects of it because that is something again that people will end up getting lost in. There's again a lot of data, a lot of models, a lot of tools, everything is there. So the key is there are questions, there are hypotheses, you need to test those hypotheses, you need to answer the questions. As long as you do that, you're fine. So just like simplify the whole thing.
All right, amazing. So I just had another question. So on the one side we have startups and then we have MNCs. So MNCs have been already established since a very long time. So they have a completely different set of data and their working is completely different. And when we talk about startups, they are relatively new. They are, constantly doing various things. They're experimenting. So how is it different for an analyst in a startup and in an MNC?
Right, that's an interesting point actually, because again, the scope and nature of work will greatly differ. So in an MNC, like if you break apart the whole structure of an MNC, it's basically a lot of people who have very clearly defined roles which they work on, right? So it's pretty clear what each person is expected to do. So in that case, it may seem like there is a restriction in terms of what all you can explore in the role, because say you're in an MNC working on like an analytics kind of a role, you may be working on analytics for a specific category of business, for a specific sub vertical within that business, right? To really understand and go deep into that. Now, thing is in those roles, even though you may not get a complete view of the entire organization, the way to look at it would be, since your scope is limited to that one vertical or one category or whatever the line of business that you are tagged to, understand that in depth, right? Again, by like speaking to whatever business teams are possible, and there is a lot of scope to improve efficiency. So there, the way to actually grow would be, you really do excel in the role that you're doing, and then you try to grow your vertical, because you may not have access and visibility as much as you would like. That is the kind of limitation that comes with an MNC, right? But so that's the way to go about it. Figure out how you can optimize or make the work that you are doing more efficient, or your team's work more efficient, and then you kind of ask for more. In a startup, the opposite happens, that you're overwhelmed with so many things. You may be asked to do many things that are outside of what a data analyst or an analyst would do, right? In that case, what I would say is you make the most of it. And one very key thing is, if your core role is data, make sure you have enough systems in place to ensure your daily reports or analysis or whatever you're doing, you automate it as much as possible. Now with AI and this GPT and all, the possibilities are like endless, right? So a lot of codes and scripts you can just get. If you write your problem statement, it will give you the code. You don't even have to write the code on your own. So when you have those kind of tools in hand, you automate the work that you are expected to do as your basic, and then you just gobble up whatever extra work that you can find, because the scope for learning that you can get in a startup is excellent. You just put your hands as much as you can and do it, provided you're doing a good job in your core role. That goes without saying, because that's what you're hired for, that's what you're expected to do. So you set that in place as soon as you can, so that you can focus on more value add activities.
Yeah, definitely. So since you took the name of AI, just wanted to understand, how is AI helping analysts, and are the roles of analysts at risk because of AI?
I think the roles of people who are just doing the data fetch and cleaning and sharing job will definitely be at risk. If you're able to add value to that data before you share it, or the analysis that you do, then I don't think you'll be at risk, because data is something that like already we have a lot of data and it's only going to grow exponentially. So the idea is, the person who can figure out what is the relevant data to look at, what is the right way to look at it, they will definitely have an edge over others, because they have more awareness of the situation that they are in the business, right? So if you figure out a way to use these tools that are now available, the AI tools, it's like I can give a few use cases. Like, for example, building hypothesis is something that requires a lot of brainstorming. It might take a lot of time to even think of what are the possible hypotheses, and then you go about testing hypothesis using data, right? AI can help you build those hypotheses, right? You just say that this is the situation you're in, and you're trying to figure out this problem. What could be the possible issues? It'll give you 10, maybe 4 are trash, 6 of them have some value, but at least you have a head start. You don't have to do a 3-4 hour brainstorming session to arrive at the hypothesis. So that is one use case. The other is, like I said, any scripts or automation that you want to do, those you can get it done there. You just validate. Basically 4-5 hours ka task becomes like a 1 hour task or less, right? So that way you can make your work more efficient, and you can be a much better analyst or data scientist in terms of the quality of insights you're able to get out of the data.
Okay, so Anand, my last question would be, where do you think the startups and the data world are heading towards, since a lot of startups are budding up right now, right? And all of them are using data in a very heavy scale. So where do you think the future is going?
So I think there is definitely scope for a lot of companies, smaller companies, to really come up and make this their area of expertise, right? So there are already quite a few companies out there in the market, bigger companies especially, who have expertise in analyzing data and coming up with these insights. So because everyone has a lot of data, and the problem is coming to the insights, or the actionable insights, I would say, that is definitely something that I feel we will see a lot of players coming in who specialize in specific areas. So for example, there would be people who will really specialize in, say, customer segmentation, or how you should basically look at your customers. So there has been a school of thought of life cycle management and things like that, right? And we went on to personalization. But to be honest, it's still very complex to come up with very good customer models, cohorts, right? It's not a very easy, straightforward thing. So AI can help to segment customers better, and what that would give rise to is people who figure out that and make that their expertise can become a company who's really good at managing customer data or getting insights from customer data. There are things like inventory management, or even pricing models, for example. A lot of companies still do their pricing in a manual way, the smaller companies, because they don't see the point of actually having a pricing model when they have a limited number of SKUs. But the reality is that if you're online and there are a lot of discounts which are running, there are so many other factors which are there, which can help you optimize a lot more by playing around with your pricing. So again, that is very data intensive. It looks very complex. It is complex, to be honest. But then there is a lot of scope to actually enter into that kind of a field and create something that can be used by many other companies. So everyone will have data. It'll be about who uses in the most efficient way. And that will give opportunities to many smaller companies coming up who can help companies understand their data better.
Absolutely. All right, Anand, thank you so much for taking out time and joining us here for this podcast. It has been really insightful, and we loved having you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Hope this was a insightful conversation.